I'm standing here at the military port at Poti, and just behind me there are two ships that have been sunk by the Russians just a few moments ago. And also on my other side here on my left, but you won't be able to see it, is another 4 ships that also have been bombed by the Russians. But what these Russian soldiers were actually based in Sanopi, which is not very far from here. It was a former Georgian base, now occupied by the Russian troops. They came here and they sank these ships. The people here are quite bewildered. Actually, the port is completely abandoned now by it. There's no any Georgian military presence at this stage, and these ships have sunk. Just moments ago also there was a big explosion. That's because one of the ships was still full of explosive and it was on fire, and then it exploded a few moments after the Russians left the port.
So, Hoda, this claim by the Russians that they'd ceased their military operations, clearly from what you're seeing, that's not the case.
Well, clearly from where I'm standing, it is not the case, and we are also hearing reports that they're not very far from here in the mountains. Some Russian aircraft would be targeting some communication systems of the Georgian army. We still have no confirmation about that, but these are the early reports that are coming in. I have to also say that throughout the day we've been driving along the road all the way to the southern Abkhazian border, about 150 kilometers away from here, and all we've seen throughout the day is a continuous build-up of Russian presence south of the border, proper Georgia really, and that was clear throughout the day, all the way from the border till this port of Poti here, which is about 150 kilometers deep in southern Georgia.
Hoda, if you could, just tell us where you were and what you saw when these attacks actually took place.
Well, I was just behind the port here, and we were behind a big wall, and we heard a huge explosion, and we saw this plume of smoke coming up to the sky. So we did get into our cars to come quickly to see what was happening here. And as we arrived, the people told us that the Russians were here and they had just sunk these boats, and this last explosion that had happened was really one of the boats was set on fire and had still not sunk, and then it exploded because it was full of explosions. I mean, the ground here is littered with shrapnel, is littered with bullets. It's still quite warm, all of it, and it's still quite fresh, this attack, and people here are still quite under shock that this is happening. Throughout the day, I have to say also that we've been talking to some of the civilians here who have been standing, watching, helpless, because there is no Georgian military presence in this area, so the Russians really are driving along these roads with complete impunity, and they meet no resistance whatsoever. And they have been calling this a Russian occupation. They think that the Russians will not leave this area anytime soon, and they're also quite surprised that there is no Georgian presence at the moment and that no one is defending this part of the country.
Hoda, I know the area that you are is essentially a military area, but are there any civilians in the region? Are there any signs of loss of human life or casualties as a result of this attack?
No, and the attack really happened in the military base, but just not very far from here to my right, there's a civilian base, and that port, and that port is quite strategic because they have some big oil refineries there, and that's where all the freight dock there. Now that port has been blockaded for the past few days, but according to the reports that we are hearing here, the Russians were at sea telling any freight not to come towards sea. The refineries are shut down. Now, not very far, about 3 kilometers from here, there's the city of Poti, and that city is completely deserted. We've been there yesterday, we've been there today. Apart from a couple of grocery shops and a few elderly people, there's absolutely no one.